Welcome to Third Rock Radio's coverage of the Artemis 1 launch, presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space, creating solutions that enable the greatest scientific discoveries in space. Right now, Raytheon Intelligence and Space is seeking top talent for their team to push the development of technology across the global space industry. Apply today at rtx.com/RISjobs. Now, from the Third Rock Radio studios, based in Houston, Texas, this is coverage of the Artemis 1 launch.
Well, I knocked on wood all day today, so I'm hoping that we are going to have a launch. Hey, it's Steve Robinson along with Donna McKenzie and Pam Kelly on Third Rock Radio, America's space station. Artemis 1 looks like it is indeed going to launch tonight, so we're very excited.
So we're still watching those counters, and that T counter has not moved, but they are talking as if it is absolutely going to happen.
Yeah, they said that they may have to push it back a little bit, so we're going to be here just giving you a lot of great information about Artemis 1, and we'll be going back and forth with a NASA TV. But it looks like this is the fourth. They've talked about the launch 4 times. This is the third launch attempt, and so I think third time's going to be the charm.
It's starting to feel real. Yeah, they tried it 3 times, and then they just went ahead and rescheduled.
Because of the hurricane, or the tropical storm, yes.
Exactly, when that was threatening. So hoping it's a go. Maybe keep knocking on wood for a little bit longer, and this will go off tonight.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to throw it over to NASA TV, kind of get updated with them, and then we're going to come back, and like I said, we have a lot of great information to share with you about Artemis 1. So thanks for joining us tonight. Here is NASA TV, and this is Third Rock Radio.
Coverage of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio is presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space. There's nothing every day about every day. Find them online at RaytheonIntelligenceAndSpace.com/RISjobs.
And the other women that you've seen in Hidden Figures.
Sometimes it's difficult to believe that I'm on this side now wearing this blue flight suit with all of the other astronauts, representing this iconic image that had so inspired and excited me my entire life.
Being of South Asian heritage, Kalpana Chawla was just such a big thing for me growing up.
I've always looked up to Sally Ride and Mae Jemison, who really laid the foundation to allow people like me to be in the position that I am now.
All of these women were pushing those boundaries and breaking those glass ceilings.
Now, of course, there are some fantastic women in leadership positions that inspire me every day.
So much has changed since the Apollo program. During the Apollo 11 launch, we had one woman, one out of 400 engineers in the room. And I look at our team today, it's much more a reflection of the world that we live in.
A big piece of why it's so important to have women and diverse backgrounds, because it allows us to bring everybody along with us on this journey.
It doesn't really matter what you look like. If you've got the brains and you have the knowledge, we need you at the table.
We are at such an exciting time in human spaceflight right now, and Artemis is such a huge part of that.
We haven't been to the moon in many, many years. We have a lot of younger generation folks that have never seen that happen.
We will understand so much more about the moon, about the Earth, about our solar system.
We're going to stay. And to me, that's an amazing idea. The moon is going to be the blueprint for how we go to Mars and out into the solar system and maybe beyond.
It is incredibly exciting to be part of this Artemis team. It still feels pretty surreal to think that I might one day walk on the moon.
To see a woman and a person of color on the surface of the moon, to be able to say that space is for everyone and that we go to space to make life better here on Earth for everyone. I know that tears will be in my eyes.
My message to women and girls out there is to find your passion, whatever that is.
Don't let anyone tell you what you can do or can't do. Only you can realize your dreams.
Faith is for everyone. And if me being in this role helps to send that message, I think that's a great thing.
And I just actually love that I don't feel like a woman at NASA. I just feel like a person at NASA.
The women of NASA are Artemis, and we make a difference every day.
I am NASA's Spacewalk Office Hardware Manager.
I'm the Program Scientist for Space Biology.
I'm the Director of NASA's Johnson Space Center.
I am Artemis.
I am Artemis.
私は Artemis です。
Yo soy Artemis.
As some Artemis.
Ana.
Je suis.
Ich bin Artemis.
Coverage of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio is presented by Raytheon Intelligence.
I just love the way that video ends with you and all these other women saying, I am Artemis. What do you think? Why is it so powerful to just hear those 3 words, I am Artemis? Why does that resonate so much?
I think it just represents how far we've come since the Apollo era and how we take advantage of the incredible diversity our country has to offer. Having seats at the table for everyone, spaces for everyone. You heard that a few times in the video, and I think we're proving that out every single day in our work, not just at NASA, but with our international partners. I think it's so important to our ability to succeed on these really complex missions.
Yeah, I thought that was a very powerful video, and I'm glad that people got that message, young girls in particular. Another person who you saw in that video is Pam Melroy. She's a former astronaut and NASA's deputy administrator. So why don't we head over to Jasmine Hopkins, because Pam is there with her now.
Thank you so much, Megan. Yes, I'm honored now to be joined by Pam Melroy, NASA Deputy Administrator. This is just a fantastic night. And we just saw that powerful video with you among so many of the great women here at NASA. What is so important about us now being ready to send, the first woman, the first person of color to the moon?
Yeah, I loved watching that video. Just inspires me. So many of those women are my friends, but also they're just such fantastic engineers and scientists and just so many roles at the agency. I've always thought one of the strongest teams that you could ever find is a family. And families have men and women, and so our teams are stronger, I think, when we have that balance and that diversity. So that was exciting. But for me, I was a part of the Apollo generation, and I was very inspired by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins on Apollo 11 and all the Apollo astronauts. I just cannot even imagine the inspiration, though, for a little girl. I mean, it never occurred to me that I wanted to be an astronaut, but of course there were no women astronauts then. I think what's going to happen now with the Artemis generation is that first woman and the first person of color is just going to have a huge impact on the next generation.
Right. We are just watching with bated breath, and I know that it's going to mean so much to little kids to look up to them. And we understand, too, this is a huge, when we launch Artemis, it's going to be a global accomplishment. Mm-hmm. We have the Artemis Accords, which are helping us make sure we explore peacefully. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, it's really important, actually, especially because unlike in Apollo, where it was actually just a few countries that had the capability to go to space, now those capabilities are proliferating throughout the world. And so what we do with the rocket is really important, and how we go is just as important. And how we go is as teams and with our partners, and with a sense of the responsibility that we have as we go out into the solar system to do it peacefully for scientific purposes and responsibly.
Right. Pam, you have a great sense of teamwork, and this is definitely not our first time. There's a lot of things that go into testing out a first-time vehicle. There's actually dynamic activity going on right now. So how does this first flight test of SLS compare to other first times, with Shuttle or with Saturn V before that?
Well, I can do even better as a test pilot, right? So there's a history there. In fact, the amazing thing about this is so first flight of a first aircraft, you actually taxi it out to the end of the runway and then run down the runway and come back and check all the data. And then you might take off once and go around the pattern and come back and land. This is a little bit like taking off and going to fly a full mission on your very first flight of an aircraft. And so everything has to be right. So this compares it's very similar to the experiences that all new rocket developments have, where, it's not just about learning the hardware, that's a big piece of it, but it's also about gelling that team together and your procedures and how you're going to deal with issues that come up, because they will come up. They always come up.
Exactly. And you have that experience as a test pilot, but also as a former astronaut. In that video, we saw you getting your induction into the Astronaut Hall of Fame, which is pretty cool. So what is your perspective, or what advice do you have for the Artemis astronauts, those ones that are going to maybe set foot on the moon?
Oh, well, they don't need my advice. I'd love to elbow them out of the way and go to the moon too. But they are fantastic. I mean, I'm so proud of all of our astronauts. I was just talking to Jessica Watkins, who just came back on Crew 4. This generation is prepared, ready, and excited. And I think they're really excited that we're putting science front and center in the Artemis program, too. We're going to learn so much about the solar system from the moon and even about the Earth. And so I think the astronauts are really excited about doing that hands-on science. And they are ready to go.
Right, I know they're ready to go, and maybe you are as well. But Artemis 1 is just the beginning. Then we have Artemis 2 and on. We're learning so much. What do you think about this just forward movement that we're making right now?
Well, it's really important. This is the Artemis campaign is actually part of a multi-decade effort that we're doing right now, which is really with the goal of creating a blueprint for how we're going to explore with humans and do science throughout the solar system. So we're going to learn through the Artemis campaign on the moon, and then we're going to go demonstrate it on Mars, and then the next destination, who knows where.
Right. I mean, we're going so much further than we ever have before. Pam Melroy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Go Artemis.
Of course, go Artemis. Megan, back to you.
Thank you both for that
Coverage
interview.
of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio is presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space, solving the most critical challenges of space. Find them online at raytheonintelligenceandspace.com/RIS jobs.
And we are back here on Third Rock Radio. I'm Pam Kelly, along with Donna McKenzie and Steve Robinson.
Yes.
It's getting close, you guys. It's going to happen pretty soon. So this is, I like what they were talking about on NASA TV earlier, how this is going to inspire a whole new generation, like many of us were inspired by the Apollo missions. Now, when Artemis 1 lifts off, which will hopefully be tonight, it will begin a journey of 1.3 million miles. And it won't just be going to the moon. It'll go around the moon and then back again. It will enter an elliptical orbit of the moon, and that will see them get to within 62 miles above its surface and about 40,000 miles beyond it. And that's important because that's farther than any spacecraft built for astronauts has ever flown.
Wow.
And then it'll return for an even closer flyby of the moon on its way home. Of course, the launch date's tonight, but the mission duration is almost 25 and a half days. And that time it'll travel 1.3 million miles. And this stood out to me. It'll re-enter the atmosphere at Mach 32. I don't have anything to compare that to other than Speed Racer drove the Mach 5. But that translates to 24,500 miles per hour. And splashdown is on December 11th, so it's going to be up there for a while.
One thing that surprised me about that is because, like, when we go to, say, the International Space Station, they can be there sometimes within the day, depending on where it launches from, sometimes within a couple of days, but they're going to be up there, or this rocket's going to be up there for 25 days.
Yeah.
That blew me away. I didn't realize it was going to be that long of a mission, so that's pretty incredible.
Well, with the most powerful rocket ever built, which we'll be talking about here shortly.
Yes.
That is just an incredible, incredible feat. And we are still watching the countdown, and we're still looking for an update. But we have so much to talk about on this incredible rocket and the mission. So NASA says that it's returning to the moon for three main reasons. First, discovery. Second, inspiration for the next generation, as we heard the NASA women speaking about as well, and also economic opportunity. So this is so interesting to me. If the Artemis program is anything like its predecessor, the Apollo missions, which they discontinued in the early 70s, and they put, 12 astronauts on the moon, it will yield these useful products used by Americans every day. So Apollo spawned the technology that underpins GPS. Where would we be without GPS?
Oh my, wow.
I wouldn't be in the building.
I was going to say, I'd still be driving around on the freeway.
And telecommunication satellites, where would you be without your phone in your hand?
Oh, could you imagine?
I don't remember. Dustbusters. Don't use mine that often. But
But we thank you, Apollo, for giving us that.
LASIK eye surgery is a technology developed for through the Apollo program. Shock absorbers for buildings, major for earthquakes. Wireless headsets, which are super hot. CAT scans, which have benefited medicine and humanity, and also air purifiers. And just imagine the future technologies that the Artemis mission will bring to life on Earth. We can't imagine, actually.
But this is step one, and I think there's going to be so many things that we are going to learn from and have even more products, like you're saying, right here on Earth because of this mission.
Yeah, amazing.
And this is step one. We're very excited to be a part of this tonight. Again, Artemis 1 is slated to launch. We're keeping an eye on the clock. In fact, we're going to throw it back to NASA TV, get caught up with them, and we will be back in just a little bit. Thank you guys for joining us here on Third Rock Radio.
Coverage of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio is presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space. Pushing the edges of technology, join their team today. Find them online at RaytheonIntelligenceAndSpace.com/RIS-jobs.
Center is closed right now. People are waving. I love it. Wow, look at that. Whatever that is, it's
awesome.
amazing.
I don't think I've ever noticed that when I'm at Space Center Houston. Maybe it's new.
I know. But yeah, just look at that crowd. It's really fun to see, again, all these people who are captivated, young and old, by today's launch attempt and the beginning of the Artemis program. I know that they're probably looking at the clock and wondering when we might see the launch today. So lovely to see all those people.
And there's the Space and Rocket Center, where we have a ton of people waving their flags, cheering us on tonight for this incredible launch this evening.
I love that. They totally look like cheerleaders, and they're embracing it. I love it. And yeah, this is the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. This is the Visitor Center over in Huntsville, Alabama. As I've said before, Marshall Space Flight Center there is super instrumental in what the Artemis program is doing. They contributed a lot to the mission, so it's nice to see everyone there. And then here is Airbus in Bremen, Germany. So Airbus is the main contractor for the European Space Agency, and together the company and ESA, they provided the European Service Module, which is an important part of the Orion spacecraft. So we have quite a bit of people there. A more reasonable time over there in Germany. It is 7 a.m. So I'm going to say Guten Morgen to them. Did I say it right? Guten Morgen to them over there in Bremen, Germany. Again, the Airbus company. All right, so let's get another check on the launch team with our Daryl Nail, who's inside there and has an update for us.
Yeah, that's right, Megan. So we are clearly in a delay now. The NASA test director, who's basically flying the ship for the launch countdown tonight, has said that we are extending the hold that we were currently in at T-minus 10 minutes and counting. And so that puts us off the 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time launch. We're now slipping indefinitely into the hold. And NASA test director Carlos Monge saying that we are currently estimating how much work needs to be done before resuming the polling that is supposed to take place 15 minutes before launch. It then goes to terminal count at T-minus 10 minutes. Now we've got an update on the tanking of the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank. Currently 95% filled. We're in topping on that tank. It is the last of 4 tanks in the Space Launch System that needed to be completely fueled up before we launch. Of course, cryogenic tanking, a complex operation that has seen some delays tonight. We had a roughly hour delay after a replenish valve on the core stage liquid hydrogen side required hands-on work by a Red Crew team that went out to the launch pad and tightened down some bolts on the valve and got it fixed before leaving the launch pad, and then launch team verifying that that work was complete. Now currently we're awaiting some work with the range. The 45th Space Wing, which oversees the range here and makes sure that the airspace and the ocean out over the flight path is clear, and also has the responsibility to destruct the rocket should it go off track. They are been working on some issues with their equipment and sending a flight termination signal to the rocket. There is testing that must happen with the flight termination system that was delayed by a bad Ethernet switch. Switch has been changed out, and now the range is looking to start testing their connectivity to the rocket in order to preserve that safety function that they are responsible for. So again, we are slipping now indefinitely into the launch window. We're awaiting the launch team to evaluate just how much time is required to complete the work to get this rocket ready to launch. And of course, when we have a new T0 for you, we'll report that out right away. Megan, back to you.
Daryl, thank you so much. As NASA prepares to explore the moon, here's a look at the spacesuits and tools that will help us to do that.
Watching Apollo footage of astronauts doing geology on the surface of the moon is a really great way to think about preparing for Artemis, for putting people on the lunar surface once again. We learn a lot in how they did science operations on the moon and what it's like to work on the moon. You see them doing geology. You see them taking rock samples, putting in a drive tube to take a core sample. You see them bouncing along the surface of the moon on the lunar rover that they used in Apollo 15 through 17. So it's a great way to help drive technology development for the next generation of spacesuits and geology sampling tools.
There's these facilities that help us train like we are on the lunar surface. These 1.6G offload systems or putting people in the aquatic environment are great ways to train the mobility part, right? Like, what can you do and how different does it feel to be in 1.6G and do these tasks?
We've been training astronauts in geology and geoscience for decades now. The Apollo astronauts had literally hundreds of hours of training in geology before they flew to the moon. It's often said that the Apollo astronauts had the equivalent of a master's degree in geology by the time they flew to the moon. In the intervening decades since Apollo, we've been training astronauts who fly to the International Space Station because when they're on the ISS, they spend time observing the Earth, looking out the window, taking pictures of what they see on the Earth's surface. Now that we're looking at putting astronauts on the surface of the moon, we also take them into the field. We take them to field sites here on Earth that resemble field sites that we expect them to see on the moon.
That's the reason why we take them out into places that are unique, like volcanic landscapes or places that are analogous to the lunar surface, to train them on the scale and fidelity of science that you just can't recreate in these facilities.
And so by combining this classroom and field training, we're able to prep them for fundamentals of geology, the major driving lunar science questions that we have that we hope to address with the Artemis program, and teaching them how to do fieldwork in relevant analog environments.
For just science aspects of developing new spacesuits, can it get you to where you need to go? And then once you get there, can you do the cool science that you need to do? And so that's, can you move effectively and efficiently in the suit to be able to collect the samples or use the tools or the instruments? For the visibility, it's like, can you make the necessary observations that you need to? Or does the suit have the lights on it that it needs to illuminate the surface and make the observations you need to? The lunar South Pole holds tremendous resources that are going to allow us to continue to explore. This is a place that we've never been before. There's so much to be learned from getting boots on the ground and exploring a unique place that challenges us as humans and also helps us develop technologies that make our everyday life that much better.
We think there might be volatiles present at the South Pole. By using these volatiles, we'll be able to do things like create drinking water, create rocket fuel to launch astronauts back to Earth. And so by harnessing the power of the land, we'll be able to help astronauts establish that long-term sustainable presence.
It's human nature to explore. Pushing our boundaries and exploring our universe is, I think, just one of those things that's just stuck in our human nature, and that we need to do it in order to understand the world around us, including our Earth and our solar system.
We just heard there how curiosity is just a part of us. So, with that in mind, why don't we do some social questions? Because some people are very curious to hear what you have to say about their questions. So why don't we pull up the first question here? What are your thoughts on the responsibilities that come with going to space? Obviously a question for you. I am not going to space.
Yeah, the opportunity to travel to space comes with a lot of responsibility. I think for all of us, it's a huge honor to be a part of these teams, and the work we're doing is so critical in supporting scientific discovery on the ground. So on the International Space Station, we're a national laboratory. Our crew executed over 350 different scientific experiments during our 6-month mission. And so when you think about that, it's years of work to get one of these payloads or an experiment on the space station. Yes. And sometimes that's someone's life's work you're holding in your hands and executing. And so being prepared for those moments is really important, and understanding how to bring the team from the ground into solving complex problems. We take that really, really seriously. And of course, we want to share what that experience is like. Only a few people have been able to go to space. And as we commercialize space, as low Earth orbit becomes more accessible, that'll change. But still, it's only available to some of us. So we really want to share what that's like and the perspective we gain from our time up there.
It's really great to see and hear that you guys acknowledge that, right? Like that this experiment that you're holding, that you're working on for 6 months, somebody has been working on literally for years. I mean, I've talked to some scientists and they're saying, oh, this has been my life's work, 20 years of my life's work. So yeah, that was a really good question. I like that question a lot. Okay, we have another one from social media here. Astro Kayla, have you considered what you might say if you had the opportunity to be the first female to set foot on the moon's surface?
No, I have not considered that. If I was in that role, it's something I would take really seriously. I think the iconic words of Neil Armstrong, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, are something that we all know, whether you witnessed that moment or not, or it happened before you were born. For me, I think we all have that embedded in our psyche, those important words. So I think it's something I would have to think a lot about ahead of that mission.
Yeah, that would be in the history books. That'll be something you're remembered for. Oh my gosh, I'd be so anxious delivering it, even after I've thought of what I want to say, like to actually open my mouth and say it from the surface of the moon. Wow. Yeah. That we'll have to think about that one for sure. Okay, let's see another question here. Oh, why is the spacesuit orange in color?
That's an awesome question that I wish I knew the answer to. Megan and I were actually talking about that earlier when we had Snoopy up here. It's a continuation of the same suit that we used during the shuttle era. And I was kind of hypothesizing that maybe it's to help forces if for some reason when we landed in the water we had to get out of the capsule for some reason, it would be easy to see us. But that I'm going to have to take a phone a friend on that one, I think, to know the real answer. I'm sure somebody will be commenting on social media right now with what the real history behind the orange suit is.
I'm trying to think about it, too. I'm thinking, does it have anything to do with SLS being orange because of the foam
match
insulation?
Your vehicle.
Yeah,
why not?
Maybe it's that.
I don't know.
I don't know. We got stumped. That was our first one that we got stumped on. Do we have another question? All right. If you could name one of the moon's craters, what would you name it?
Oh, man. What would you name it, Megan? I don't know. That's a big decision.
I thought you might say the name of your zero-G graph.
Oh, FOW? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's a pretty big responsibility, I think, to name these geological features. And a lot of the craters on the moon already have names. So I'm sure there's some that maybe they haven't named, they're too small, or we haven't explored them yet. But a lot of them already do have names. Like we're going to be exploring the edge of Shackleton Crater as part of Artemis mission. So a lot of them are already named and mapped.
Yeah. Thanks for throwing it back on me. I was like, I don't know. Do you think our parents or husband or fiance are now upset that we didn't say them?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. I think they understand.
All right.
These are big decisions.
This is. All right. Last question here, for this segment at least. What will Orion do when it gets to the moon?
So for this mission, Artemis 1, it's actually going to orbit the moon and then go into a distant retrograde orbit. And so it'll get really close as 62 miles, and then go way past the moon. and way deeper into space than we've ever been before. So, yeah, the Orion vehicle will be checking out all of its systems. We're going to be analyzing that data from the ground, and then we're going to see that it can survive re-entry and a successful splashdown off the coast of San Diego.
Yeah, that was a good question too. Okay, well, again, just keep those questions coming. We are entering into this launch window, and we do have time, so we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to try at least to answer most of your questions. So you've been hearing throughout the broadcast all the different science that returning to the moon will enable us to do. So there's actually something called the Prime 1 mining experiment, and that's going to robotically look for ice and other resources below the lunar surface.
NASA's first Polar Resources ice mining experiment, also known as Prime 1, will robotically look for ice and other resources below the lunar surface. Thanks to data from spacecraft orbiting the moon, scientists believe that the polar regions contain water ice in the form of ice just below the surface. With the right technologies, that ice is a game-changing resource that can be mined and used to produce propellants.
Coverage of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio is presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space. There's nothing every day about every day. Find them online at RaytheonIntelligenceandSpace.com/RIS-jobs.
And thanks everybody for joining us for this live broadcast. We are just waiting for news of this rocket launch because millions of people around the world are waiting as well, but us in particular because we're so excited about it. We've been working hard towards this, for some time now. We are still waiting for the T0 to be announced.
There's a T- clock. There's an L-. Right. So we're that's above our pay grade. So I don't know, but
there's still a hold. But the launch window has begun, and that window is specifically 2 hours. So we are just waiting to see. And in the meantime, wow. Just so much to talk about with this rocket, and I certainly hope that it does go off. It'll be spectacular when it does.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a good show tonight. But one thing I wanted to cover real quick is some of the mission objectives for Artemis 1, because this is a three-prong mission or system, if you will, because you have Artemis 1, then 2, then 3. Well, Artemis 1 is doing a lot of the heavy lifting because it needs to test all the systems and whatnot for Artemis 2 and then Artemis 3. So there are 4 primary objectives of Artemis 1. First one is to demonstrate Orion's heat shield can withstand the high speed and high heat conditions when returning through Earth's atmosphere from lunar velocity. So that's going to be a big point, because this mission is obviously uncrewed, but when we have people on board, that's going to be kind of important. They also want to demonstrate operations and facilities during all mission phases. Again, they're going to be testing pretty much everything. They're going to want to retrieve Orion after splashdown. Kind of important, because that has a pretty big price tag on it.
Yes, a few bucks there.
And finally, with Artemis 1, they want to accomplish additional flight test objectives. So they're just going to be testing, and we're going to get a lot of answers to some questions NASA has when Artemis 1 gets up and running.
And like you said, again, Artemis 1 is the one that paves the way for all the rest for crewed missions back to the moon.
And I think that's why they've had to move the launch, because it is that important. This has to be perfect for us to get the answers we need to continue with Artemis. So.
Absolutely.
And as always, NASA has considered every detail and made the best use of the space and this opportunity. So on board Artemis 1, there'll be several payloads aboard both the SLS and Orion, and that includes quite a few technology demonstrations and science investigations, and there'll be some really cool mementos returned to Earth in Orion as well. Maybe we'll talk more about that later. CubeSats, they're really cool. They're maybe the size of a shoebox or a suitcase. They're small, low-cost science and technology experiments, and they will be deploying into deep space from Orion. And all of these will be a part of the picture, helping pave the way for human exploration in deep space. And the cool part is that a lot of these come from our International Space Agency partners and universities all around the country and the world. Now, that includes the Lunar Ice Cube. That comes from Morehead State University in Kentucky, and it will be searching for water in all forms and other volatiles with an infrared spectrometer. Not sure what that means, but it sounds really important.
And very cool.
Yeah, very cool too. And then there's the Loon IR, or Looneer. This is put together by Lockheed Martin in Colorado. That will be performing advanced infrared imaging of the lunar surface. And I think I've got this one right. Omotenashi. That comes from the
Bless you.
Yeah, thank you. Gesundheit. That comes from the Japanese Space Agency. It's a CubeSat that will be developing the world's smallest lunar lander and also studying the lunar environment. And one that'll study the area of radiation is BioSentinel, which is put together by the Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley in California. And they'll use single-celled yeast to detect, measure, and compare the impact of deep space radiation on living organisms over a period of time. Of course, that's important to long-term human exploration of the moon and eventually Mars. So
there's a lot going on.
A lot going on there.
Yeah. Definitely so. So we're, like I said, we're keeping an eye on the clock, and we'll be checking back in right now with a NASA TV just to get an update on the launch. But Artemis 1 is going. We're just waiting for them to give us the all systems go. And we thank you guys for joining us. It's Third Rock Radio. We'll be back in just a few.
Coverage of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio is presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space, solving the most critical challenges of space. Find them online at raytheonintelligenceandspace.com/RIS-jobs.
Payload Orion beyond low Earth orbit and send it on a path to head out to the moon. Now, after that burn is complete, ICPS separates. It's going to do what's called a disposal burn. So it's going to send itself on a path from Earth around the moon and slingshot out into what's known as a heliocentric orbit. So it's going to completely leave the Earth-Moon system and go into orbit around our sun. But after it separates, propulsion duties get handed over to the European Service Module, and it's got a couple of different engines that it's going to be using, and we're going to be testing those out just on day one. We're going to do what's called the Outbound Trajectory Correction Burn 1. And we'll do a couple of these trajectory corrections as we're flying out to the moon, but that first one is that first critical test of this large engine, the Orbital Maneuvering System engine. That's the one that has the most thrust, generating about 6,000 pounds of force in a vacuum, and that's what's going to be doing a lot of our maneuvers, or giving us that pushing power as we do these maneuvers around the moon to enter into what's known as Distant Retrograde Orbit, or DRO. And that's this dotted line that you see around here. Now, we call it distant basically because of the distance we're away from the moon. We're about 40,000 miles, a little bit less, off the lunar surface. And then we call it retrograde because the moon orbiting planet Earth in this direction, going in a counterclockwise fashion, we're going to be entering into a clockwise orbit around the moon, opposite retrograde. Now, to do that, we're going to get in close. We're going to dip in off the lunar surface. We're going to be about 80 statute miles off the lunar surface as we do this outbound powered flyby. Again, the major thrust coming from that Orbital Maneuvering System engine. After we do that, we'll do a final maneuver to actually go into that distant retrograde orbit, that DRO. Now, why DRO? Why are we not just going around the moon and coming back on like a free return trajectory, which we did on some of the Apollo missions? Well, in DRO, it's a very stable orbit. It doesn't require a lot of fuel to maintain that area around the moon. So it gives you a lot of time to really test the spacecraft. If you followed with any launch of a new spacecraft, you know there's only so much testing you can do on the ground. Once you actually put all of that hardware in space, in the environment that it's going to be operating, hundreds of thousands of miles away from Earth, you're going to learn things you didn't even realize about everything from communications, the life support systems, the thermal control. Everything on a spacecraft needs to get put through its paces in this environment before we put people on board, and that's why we're heading out to DRO. Eventually, though, it's going to be time to come home, and we will do a DRO departure maneuver. This, again, firing up that Orbital Maneuvering System engine and others on the service module, and this is what's going to commit us from leaving the moon and heading on back towards Earth. We'll dip in once more, close off the lunar surface, slingshot and use the lunar gravity to do this return-powered flyby. And then, similar to the way out, we can make correction burns as we kind of fine-tune our path back towards the Earth. and then it's time for re-entry. A couple of things happen before that. One of the really critical ones, spacecraft separation. We're going to detach the European service module shortly before re-entry. Its job largely done. That burns up in the Earth's atmosphere and reveals on the crew module the heat shield. I circled it earlier. This is goal number 1 of the Artemis mission. Artemis 1 mission is testing this heat shield at lunar return velocities, because when we make that trip around the moon and we come back, we are going in speeds of excess of 20,000 miles an hour. So when we slam into the Earth's atmosphere, it's going to heat that thing up to more than 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For the Artemis 1 profile, we're going to do what's known as a skip re-entry. So basically, you can come in too shallow and skip off the atmosphere, too narrow, and you're going to do what's known as a ballistic entry, which really heats things up. We're going to do kind of a mix where we're going to skip once off the atmosphere, and that we're still going to get the heat, but that helps to reduce some of the G loads on the crew. Once you're through that, you get to parachute deploy. There's 11 parachutes in total that are going to slow Orion down before it splashes down. We're going to be going from 20,000 miles an hour to about 300 miles an hour before those parachutes deploy, and then they do a final job of getting it in the water in the South Pacific. We've got these big orange balloons. That's an uprighting system, so even if Orion landed in the water upside down, those can inflate, and they put us back upright into what's known as stable 1. That's where you want your spacecraft to be, nice and upright in the water, especially if you're an astronaut in there floating. Now, we also have a large U.S. Navy ship with a big bay that's going to basically come up and swallow Orion into its deck, and you've got a couple of other assets in the area to help recover hardware, the forward bay cover, parachutes, things like that. But that's scheduled to happen 26 days after a launch today. So that's 26 days from liftoff here in Florida around the moon to a splashdown in the Pacific, and that will be the first mission in the Artemis program, the farthest we've ever sent a human-rated spacecraft in history, and just the first step before we put people on board. So that's a look at everything still to come. We're counting down to that launch. I'll send it back over to Megan and the team at the host desk, guys.
A very comprehensive look at that. Thank you so much, Dan. If you're just joining us, welcome to Kennedy Space Center and our live coverage of Artemis 1, an uncrewed flight test that will return us to the moon in nearly 50 years. But you know, some might ask, why the moon? Well, here's why.
We are going. The history of this agency is marked with broken barriers, once viewed as impossible, with science fiction turned reality, with innovations that have spun industries all their own, and with demonstrations of peace for all humankind.
We soar in the skies of our home planet. We maintain a human presence just outside of gravity, and we touch points all across the solar system and beyond. We're going back to the moon, and this is why.
The moon is a treasure trove of science.
It holds opportunities for us to make discoveries about our home planet, about our sun,
and about our solar system.
The wealth of knowledge to be gleaned from the moon will inspire a new generation of thought and action.
Without fail, every major program and mission NASA has invested in has led to technologies and capabilities that have shaped our culture.
The breakthroughs of the Artemis era will define our generation and the generations to follow.
The tens of thousands of jobs associated with propelling us to the moon today are just the beginning of a lunar economy that will see hundreds of thousands of new jobs develop around the world.
This is not an ambition of one entity or one country. The exploration of the moon is a shared effort,
woven together by a desire for the greater good.
Why the moon? Because the missions of tomorrow will be sparked by the accomplishments of the Artemis generation today.
Because the ambition to go has already begun.
And because Mars is calling. We need to learn what it takes to establish a community on another cosmic shore. So let's camp close before pushing out.
And so, we go to the moon now, not as a series of isolated missions, but to build a community on and around the moon capable of proving how to live on other worlds.
We'll use the lessons from more than 50 years of peaceful exploration to send a new generation to the lunar surface to stay.
We will anchor our efforts on the lunar South Pole to establish the Artemis Base Camp,
positioning us for long-term science and exploration of the lunar surface.
We will prove what it takes to assemble a complex ship in deep space.
We will perfect descending down to and returning from a distant surface.
We will learn how humans can survive and thrive in a partial gravity environment.
With improved spacesuit designs, mobile habitats, and with reconnaissance robots pre-positioning and relocating supplies.
We will learn how to utilize the resources we find on these other worlds, starting with finding water ice and purifying it to drinkable water.
And refining that into hydrogen for fuel and oxygen to breathe.
We will establish fission power plants on the surface of the moon, capable of supporting a growing community of efforts.
And we will expand the logistics supply chain
to enable commercial and international partners
to resupply and refuel deep space outposts.
None of this is simple or easy, but nothing in our history ever has been.
The Eagle has landed. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
This kind of continuous lunar presence is a natural extension of all that we've learned in low Earth orbit. And what we will accomplish there will ensure the monumental missions to Mars are within reach. As we ready the launch of the first Artemis mission, and as commercial companies ready their lunar landers for the first private payload deliveries, we have already begun to take the next step.
Throughout this launch broadcast, our NASA's Leah Martin has been introducing us to people over at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex who have come out for hopefully the maiden voyage of Artemis 1. People from near and far, young and old, just really excited to hopefully see this historic flight. So now she's joined by somebody else who has a really interesting story. Leah, tell us about it.
Megan, I think one of the most exciting things about being here tonight is being with people who are like-minded, who have such a strong tie to the history of our nation's space program and their love of spaceflight. And I actually struck up an amazing conversation with Scott here, and you were telling me about the special tie that you have to tonight's launch as well.
Oh, yeah, I literally grew up with NASA. My father went to work with the NACA before NASA, went to work for Dr. von Braun, followed him over to Marshall Space Flight Center, and became, when it became NASA, he worked on the Jupiter C, Redstone, Saturn I, Saturn V, and then because of that, he brought me here to see Apollo 11 launch. So that was my first launch. I was 5 years old. I loved it. Still remember the sound. That's about all. And then years later, through my flying career, I was able to bring my sons back with my friends that flew the shuttle, and they saw 5 launches and 4 landings. But basically, I wanted to be here. I was here for the first moon launch, the last moon launch back when Uncle Gene Cernan, our family friend, went to Apollo 17. So I wanted to be here for this because it's kind of in our family, in our blood. And hopefully I'll be around for the next one when we go and land again. So that's
incredible. So you have NASA actually in your DNA, grew up with the program.
Yeah. I knew most of the German scientists. The kids sat in our lap, Dr. Ernst Stirlinger, and my father flew with von Braun because he was a general aviation pilot as well. So they'd get off work and fly. And they were in Life magazine together, National Geographic. So it was fun. I literally knew Al Shepard, all the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo guys, and it was an honor. I would have loved to have been an astronaut, but I went a different route, and but I can still come here and see them.
We can, and we're so grateful, so thrilled to see you here tonight, and so excited that you will be able to actually compare the last launch and the sound of the last one with the one tonight. It's absolutely going to rock the sky.
I want it to be even louder. I want to feel it. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's been an honor to meet you. And Megan, we're going back to you.
Leah, thank you so much for sharing that. That was such a fun story. Here we are now at Space Center Houston. This is a live look inside of the visitor center there. Lots of people hoping to see the launch today. I love this guy in the front with his NASA shirt representing. And again, just seeing children and young and old, just all these people who feel captivated and are excited about our next giant leap into deep space. So glad to have them here. Oh my gosh, I love this.
Yeah, the team in Marshall and Huntsville there is always ready for their shot, waving their flags. They're super pumped. That's the home to the SLS program office, so they have a dog in the fight tonight, seeing Artemis launch for the first time.
Is that an inflatable astronaut in the center? Do you see that? I think somebody is dressed up as an astronaut.
Look at that.
Yeah,
they're
representing.
Ready to go.
I love this. Yeah, I'm so glad that they're there. Again, these visitor centers are closed to the public, but you know, the people there decided to hold a watch party.
Oh, look, our friends in Germany are ready for us this time. They anticipated the delay. They look pumped and ready to go.
So these are employees of Airbus. Airbus is the main contractor for the European Space Agency, and together they provided the European service module for the Orion spacecraft. So really, we should be applauding them. They shouldn't be applauding. Thank you so much, guys, for your contribution to the program, and can't wait to see Orion and SLS launch. Okay, so now let's head back over to Daryl Nail over with the launch team so we can hear any updates about a new T0.
Yeah, Megan, thank you. And a clearer picture is starting to emerge as the launch team now reports out that they only have a few minutes left of work to do before they're ready to pick up polling. And we're also hearing that some of that polling, which kicks off with the mission management team, is also now just about 3.5 minutes away. Now, we are currently still in that hold. But the launch team, NASA's test director, is continuing to move the team forward. We've wrapped up work on the upper stage and the lower stage. You're looking now live inside Firing Room 1, where Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson is overseeing her launch team. We've had a number of delays that have put us off the T0, but we are starting to track to a T0 close to around a quarter till, top of the hour. But we do need to have some polling that takes place. I'm pausing now because I'm listening in to the teams as they communicate. In this launch window, which we're currently 26 minutes into, and it's 2 hours long, it runs until 3:04 a.m. Eastern Time, we have what's called 40 cutouts. And in those cutouts, they range from about a second to about a minute. These are times where they can't launch. These cutouts must be accounted for when determining a new T0. The upper stage of the rocket, which was the last to get ready and configured, just recently the team cycled the liquid hydrogen valves, which is required, and they are currently working on the LO2 valves, liquid oxygen valves in the upper stage. That work is almost done. We are now a minute and a half away from the poll of the mission management team, which is several minutes before T-minus 15 minutes. When that poll starts, we'll get a clearer picture of our T0. NASA's test director has informed the launch team to all switch to a common communication channel. It's called 232. And what this means is that the entire launch team is now on one channel, and all future communication will happen there, whereas there are many channels. Now they reduce it down to one. Just heard from NASA test director Carlos Monge. I'm sorry, Jeff Spaulding. Jeff Spaulding's on. They swapped out. There are currently no constraints to launch. Great news. Again, no constraints to launch. And they're getting ready to pick up with a poll to determine readiness for launch. Okay, NASA test director Jeff Spaulding getting ready to conduct the readiness poll, so we are getting close. We're going to pull up the audio now so that you can listen in.
LPs go. And rock. Rockets go. All right, copy all. And Launch Director NTD, our launch team is ready to proceed at this time.
I copy all NTD. At this time, I will proceed with my poll. And attention on 232, this is the Launch Director performing the final poll for launch. Verify no constraints and go for launch. EGS Program Chief Engineer.
EGS Program Chief Engineer verifies that the EGS, SLS, and Orion Program Chief Engineers have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, Greg. Thank you. EGS Chief Safety Officer.
The EGS CSO verifies the SLS, Orion, and EGS CSOs have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, John. Thank you. Range weather.
Weather has no constraints and weather is go for launch.
Copy, LWO. And Mission Manager. And Mission Manager, Launch Director.
Launch Director, Mission Manager on 232. The mission management team has been polled. You have a go to proceed with terminal count and launch of Artemis 1.
I copy all. Thank you. And NTD, Launch Director.
Go ahead, Launch Director.
Yes, sir. On behalf of all the men and women across our great nation who have worked to bring this hardware together to make this day possible, and for the Artemis generation, this is for you. At this time, I give you a go to resume count and launch Artemis 1.
Copy, Launch Director, and thank you. All right, we do have a couple of steps to configure, and then we will be ready to resume the clock. CVSE, NTD.
CVSE here.
Initiate recording of Orion cameras at this time.
In work.
R, NTD.
RSR here.
perform the booster ignition SNA arm rotation enable.
NDT, RSR, booster ignition SNA arm and rotation enable is complete.
And I copy. Thank you.
Okay, so there you heard the poll from Launch Director
Early.
getting ready to get that new T0 time. The poll that you heard was the NASA Test Director's poll. And
all right, and we have verified no cutouts at this time. And all personnel, we are going to resume the clock. GLS, you can resume the clock on your mark.
GLS copies. Countdown clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. GLS mainline has been initiated.
okay,
T-minus 10 minutes and counting.
we are T-minus 10 minutes away from liftoff of Artemis 1. As you can see, the clock is now moving. Let's put that up. T-minus 9 minutes and 47 seconds. The L-minus 15 poll complete.
Show
It went
06:47:44 is the new liftoff time.
Affirm.
Okay.
Oh 01:47:44, 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time and 44 seconds. We went straight into terminal count.
Coverage of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio is presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space. There's nothing every day about every day. Find them online at raytheonintelligenceandspace.com/RIS-jobs.
Thank you for joining us here on Third Rock Radio for launch coverage of the Artemis 1 mission. So we just, after several delays, got a go for launch. The T clock is, terminal clock, I believe, is back on. So we're down to about 8 minutes and 40 seconds away from the launch of Artemis 1.
Yeah, very excited about that, and we're sorry we had to stay so long away from you guys, but the problem is we were waiting just like you all were when they could finally figure out how long it's going to be, but we are ready to roll. Now, real quick, while no people will be on board Orion, the spacecraft will host 3 simulated humans. There are actually 2 mannequins that are supplied by Europe and by NASA. The third crew member, I'm sure you've heard us talking about, is a Moonikin. He's named after Apollo 13 engineer Arturo Campos, and the Moonikin includes sensors for acceleration, vibration, and radiation to assess the stresses of space on a human being during launch. And that's not all that's going to be on board. This is a tradition that NASA's been doing for years. Snoopy, of course, from Peanuts, is going to be the official zero-gravity indicator for the flight of Artemis 1.
And so that will be in the Orion capsule. And basically, the rocket's design breaks down into 2 main parts, the Orion capsule and the Space Launch System. And we're about to get a load of these powerful engines, okay?
Thing is huge.
Okay, so the energy output of the RS-25 engines, if you convert it into electricity, they would power nearly 850,000 miles of streetlights on a road stretching to the moon and then back and then 15 times around the Earth, according to NASA. So they will accelerate the rocket at 17,000 miles an hour during the first 8 minutes of the flight. So to put it into context, it weighs 5.75 million pounds when fully fueled for launch, which it is. Yet it will climb nearly 500 feet straight up in just 7 seconds.
Unbelievable.
That's some juice.
And when
that's
NASA,
some power.
Yes, that's right. And when NASA first sent man to the moon during the Apollo 11 mission, the Saturn V just reached a top speed of a little over 6,000 miles per hour. So there's context there. So when the rocket's main engine shut down 8 minutes after liftoff, the rocket will be moving at around 18,000 miles an hour. And that is fast enough to cover 88 football fields placed end to end in 1 second.
Oh, wow.
And then the rocket's upper stage will increase the velocity to 22,600 miles an hour, or 110 football fields per second, to break out of Earth orbit and send the Orion capsule to the moon.
Wow.
And that's where we're going.
That is crazy.
In just minutes.
Yes, indeed. All right, I say we take a quick time out, check in with NASA TV, then we're going to come back and wrap up our end, and we're going to let you hear this launch as it's about 6 minutes away. We'll be right back on Third Rock Radio.
Coverage of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio is presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space, solving the most critical challenges of space. Find them online at raytheonintelligenceandspace.com/RIS-jobs.
The liquid oxygen tank will come a little later. Now we're arming the Orion ascent pyros and transfer to internal power. The Launch Abort System, or LAS jettison motor, is now armed. On this flight, the abort motor is inactive because there is no crew on board. Up next is the Flight Termination System, or FTS, which gives the Space Force the ability to destruct the rocket if it goes in the wrong direction. Let's listen in for that.
GLS is go for FTS arm.
The Flight Termination System is now armed. Coming up at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, a big moment. This is where the RS-25 engines and their bleed go to high flow. It's been a little tricky to dial in.
GLS is go for LH2 high flow bleed check.
Good word, we've passed that. The cryo team got the LH2 engine bleed pressure loop dialed in. They are now at the right temperature for launch. Countdown continues. T-minus 4.
Coverage of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio is presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space. Pushing the edges of technology, join their team today. Find them online at raytheonintelligenceandspace.com/RIS-jobs.
And thank you so much for joining us for our live broadcast. This is so exciting. We have been waiting for this for some time. I'm Donna McKenzie. Pam Kelly's with me. Steve Robinson.
Yes.
And we are now at T-minus 3 minutes and 6 seconds to liftoff.
Okay, guys, so before we launch, since we have a minute, I'm going to put you to the test. Quick trivia question for you.
Oh, no.
Okay, so everything about the NASA Orion spacecraft is new, and that includes a new entry technique. So will the Orion spacecraft test as it returns to Earth from the moon? What new entry technique will it test? Will it be the A, skip entry maneuver, B, point entry maneuver, C, coast-to-coast entry, or D, atmosphere entry? Skip, point, coast to coast, or atmosphere?
I'm going to guess coast to coast.
I'm going to say skip.
Oh, Donna McKenzie. Boom, boom, boom.
Okay.
This is neat. Orion will attempt the first skip entry for a human spacecraft. It's like skipping a rock across the surface of a pond. The capsule uses Earth's upper atmosphere to slow down and generate lift, skipping back out into space. After the skip, Orion re-enters Earth's atmosphere for landing. Like
That's amazing.
Skipping a rock.
That is just amazing.
Donna cheated. She looked over your shoulder on that one.
Well, there's so many people who are involved around the world with the Artemis missions. And according to NASA, every state in the United States has contributed to the design of the Artemis mission through partnerships with private companies and with universities. Every corner of our nation can stake a claim in the success of the mission. I think that's amazing.
That's awesome. All right, we got about 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Real quick, another NASA tradition that's been going on for years and years for every one of their missions is when NASA puts people's names on board. Now, on board the Orion spacecraft, which is taking off in just a little bit, 3.4 million names.
Including mine.
Including mine, too. Were submitted. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us this evening. It's been a long evening, but it looks like we are going to be launching in just a little bit. We will keep the launch. You will hear it live here on Third Rock Radio. So thanks again for joining us this evening. I'm Steve Robinson, along with Donna McKenzie and Pam Kelly. Got to thank our producer, Keegan Lucas, for doing a great job. And just enjoy this launch. It is something that it's monumental in space history. So enjoy it right here on Third Rock, and we will talk to you tomorrow.
Coverage of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio is presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space. There's nothing every day about every day. Find them online at raytheonintelligenceandspace.com/RIS-jobs.
So if we have a hold, we'd have to recycle back to T-minus 10 minutes and recharge those batteries. The count continues. A note now, shortly after liftoff.
1 minute.
Shortly after liftoff, Mission Control Houston will take control of the rocket, and my colleague, Leah Cheshire, will take over commentary. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. Coming up at T-minus 33 seconds, the GLS will hand off control to the ALS. This is the autonomous launch sequencer. On board the rocket, it will take over command and control of the rocket. But the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
Go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now flowing under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q. Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter. Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange. 2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated. And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, We just heard the call for 3-engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange. We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. So far, we've had a clean ascent. We saw those solid rocket boosters jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels, fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good. Our core stage main engine cutoff time is about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. We are now 5 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, 7,656 miles per hour. Again, 4 good core stage engines, those 4 RS-25 engines. The last time those core stage engines flew, they were taking space shuttles to orbit, and now with upgraded capabilities, they're launching the future of human spaceflight. Five minutes, 42 seconds into the mission, we are now traveling 8,800 miles per hour, 345 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. Again, we are anticipating core stage main engine cutoff at about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. And about 10 seconds later, we'll see core stage separation, at which point Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be flying free. Now traveling over 10,000 miles per hour, 6 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, 427 miles downrange. Quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams continue to monitor this first flight. About a minute and a half now until that core stage main engine cutoff time. Our 4 core stage engines continue to fire at maximum thrust.
This concludes the live coverage of the Artemis 1 launch on Third Rock Radio, presented by Raytheon Intelligence and Space, building space technologies to advance life here on Earth and beyond. Visit RTX.com for more details on their involvement with the Artemis program and to join the team at rtx.com/RISjobs. From satellites that observe our planet and keep us safe, to systems and software that enable the most difficult space missions, there's nothing every day about every day at Raytheon Intelligence and Space. From the entire staff at Third Rock Radio, based in Houston, Texas, thank you for joining us for this historic event.